All right, thanks for coming back. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge Family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
The first thing I felt was the cold bite of metal closing around my wrists. Military police don't rush when they know the cameras are watching. They move slow, clean, almost polite. The click of the cuffs echoed louder than the jet engines warming up behind us. I remember thinking how strange it was that a place designed for movement planes convoys, orders flying every direction, could suddenly feel frozen. Fort Liberty's runway stretched out in front of me, wide and painfully open. No walls, no shadows to hide in, just concrete wind and witnesses. Captain Sarah Miller, one of the MPs, said loud enough for everyone within 50 yards to hear, "You are being detained on suspicion of theft of classified budget allocation documents." Suspicion. That word has weight in the military. It doesn't mean maybe. It means someone important already decided what you are. I didn't fight them. I didn't ask for a lawyer. I didn't raise my voice. 10 years in logistics teaches you something useful. When a process is already moving, pushing against it just gets you run over faster. As they guided me forward, boots scraping against the runway, I noticed how quiet the base had become. Conversations stopped. Forklifts paused mid-task. A few junior officers pretended not to stare and failed badly. Then I heard it. A laugh, not loud, not dramatic, just sharp enough to cut. I turned my head and saw my sister standing near the edge of the tarmac, perfectly pressed uniform hands folded behind her back like she was posing for a recruitment poster. Major Elena Miller, my parents' pride. The family success story. The one whose name always came with an approving nod. She wasn't trying to hide her smile. As I was pulled closer, she stepped in close enough that the MP hesitated for a second. Rank still matters even in moments like this. Elena leaned toward me and whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "Looks like they're finally cleaning out the excess inventory." I stared straight ahead. If I looked at her, I knew I'd say something that would end my career faster than the cuffs already had. To her, I wasn't a sister. I was surplus. The MPs nudged me forward again. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the tinted window of a nearby transport truck. Same uniform I'd worn for years. Same insignia I'd earned the hard way. Nothing about me looked like a criminal, but perception beats reality every time. As they guided me toward the vehicle waiting at the edge of the runway, I saw my parents standing off to the side. They hadn't rushed over, they hadn't asked questions, they hadn't even looked confused. They just stood there. My mother's arms were crossed tight against her chest like she was cold or embarrassed. My father's jaw was set in that familiar line he used when something disappointed him deeply, like a bad investment or a broken appliance. They didn't look at me like a daughter. They looked at me like a problem that had finally been removed. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late to fix errors in supply manifests. All the nights I'd slept on a cot in my office during audits, because a decimal in the wrong place could derail an entire unit's readiness. All the quiet work that never made it into speeches or ceremonies. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the story forming in their heads. And Elena was very good at writing stories. The MP opened the back of the vehicle. The inside smelled like vinyl and disinfectant. As I stepped up, the weight of the cuffs pulled my shoulders forward, forcing a posture I wasn't used to. Small, contained, manageable. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. Charges like this don't come out of nowhere. Theft of classified budget documents isn't something you trip into. It's a precision accusation. Someone had to frame it carefully. Someone had to know exactly what would stick. Someone who understood the system. Someone who had watched me work for years. I glanced sideways just once. Elena was already pulling out her phone thumbs, moving fast. Probably texting congratulations to someone. Or maybe updating her husband. Or maybe just enjoying the moment. She didn't look back. The door slammed shut behind me. The engine started. As the vehicle rolled forward, the runway slid past in slow motion. I watched planes I'd helped provision, units I'd kept operational, disappear behind concrete barriers and fences. I wasn't scared. That surprised me. I should have been panicking. Anyone with half a brain knows what accusations like this can do. Careers don't survive them. Reputations don't recover. Even if you're cleared, the stain stays. But fear wasn't what I felt. I felt clear. Clear in the way you do when a long, ugly pattern finally snaps into focus. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who handled the boring parts so Elena could shine, the one who fixed problems before they became visible so no one ever knew they existed. And now I was the problem. That meant something had changed. Or rather, something had been exposed. The vehicle slowed as we approached the holding area. I could see the familiar security gate ahead, the same one I'd walked through 100 times with a badge and a coffee in hand. This time, I didn't need my badge. I had something else. As the truck came to a stop, I closed my eyes for just a second and made a decision. I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't going to explain, and I wasn't going to play defense. Because when someone laughs while you're being handcuffed on a military runway, they're telling you exactly how confident they feel. And confidence like that always leaves fingerprints. Before they opened the door, I took one steady breath and asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. If your own family is willing to destroy you to protect their image, how far are you willing to go? To protect the truth. Have you ever been the most reliable person in the room, only to be treated like dead weight the moment you stopped being convenient? If that's ever happened to you, tell me in the comments. The bench in the holding room was bolted to the floor, and the cuffs cut just enough to remind me not to get comfortable. I stared at the wall and let my breathing settle because once your hands are restrained, your mind starts roaming whether you invite it or not. That's when the numbers showed up, not figures floating in the air or anything dramatic. Just clean columns, totals lining up discrepancies that didn't. My brain has always worked that way. Give me a mess and I'll turn it into something orderly. It's not a talent people applaud, but it's one they quietly rely on. For 10 years, that's what I did in uniform. I didn't kick down doors or give speeches. I made sure fuel arrived before it was needed. I caught billing errors before auditors smelled blood. I reconciled procurement records that looked fine on the surface and rotten underneath. When people slept well at night, it was often because I hadn't. Elena never touched any of that. She didn't need to. While I was buried in spreadsheets and compliance checks, she was the face. Briefings, ceremonies, perfect posture in front of the right people. She'd walk into meetings with a polished report under her arm, present it with confidence, and walk out with a handshake and a promise of recognition. Those reports came from my desk. I'd send them over with notes in the margins, flags, warnings, context. She'd delete the comments, keep the conclusions, and deliver them like they were born in her head. Then came the medals. Commendations pinned neatly on her chest, while I stood in the background clapping with everyone else. Applause feels different when you know exactly how the trick was done. The first time it happened, I told myself it didn't matter. Rank isn't everything, impact is. The system rewards visibility, not accuracy, and I'd chosen a specialty where accuracy is invisible by design. That lie worked for a while. At home, it worked even better. My parents loved results they could explain to friends. Elena gave them that. Promotions, photos, stories that fit into dinner conversations without making anyone uncomfortable. Me, I gave them silence. They called me practical, then cautious, then eventually limited. My mother liked the word underachiever. She said it like it was a diagnosis, not an insult. As if I'd been tested and found wanting. My father didn't bother with labels, he just compared. Elena's unit just received a commendation, he'd say, staring at me over the rim of his coffee mug. What have you been doing lately? I'd answer honestly. Audits, corrections, preventing a supply shortfall that would have grounded an entire rotation. He'd nod once, unimpressed. Well, he'd say someone has to do the boring jobs. They invested accordingly. When Elena wanted an advanced leadership course that came with a hefty fee, they wired the money the same day. When she needed a place near the base, they bought a condo without blinking. Real estate is respectable. It photographs well. When I applied for my officer qualification course, I was told to be realistic. We can't keep funding both of you, my mother said like she was apologizing for the weather. I took out a loan, signed my name on paperwork that would follow me for years. I didn't tell anyone. Debt has a way of changing how people look at you, and I already knew my place in the family hierarchy. Elena congratulated me, though. That's impressive, she said, smiling the way people do when they're surprised you manage something on your own. I didn't think you'd go through with it. Neither did our parents. I graduated quietly, no party, no framed certificate on the living room wall, just another line on a resume that no one at family gatherings ever asked about. The imbalance wasn't loud, that's what made it durable. It lived in small decisions. Who got support, who got excuses, who got described as ambitious, and who got described as difficult. When Elena made a mistake, it was because the system was flawed. When I caught one, it was because I was nitpicking. When she pushed boundaries, she was a leader. When I raised concerns, I was being negative. I learned to stop raising them at home. At work, though, I never stopped. That's the part people don't understand about logistics officers. We're trained to notice patterns, but we're also trained to keep emotions out of it. Numbers don't care how you feel. They tell the truth whether you like it or not. Over time, I noticed something else. Every time Elena's profile rose, my workload did too. More reviews, more late nights, more quiet. Can you take a look at this emails forwarded from her address? She trusted my work. She just didn't credit it. Sitting there with the cuffs still tight, I realized how neatly everything fit. The family dynamics, the career trajectories, the way I'd been conditioned to accept less and deliver more. None of it was accidental. If you grow up being told you're second best, you either start believing it or you start compensating. I compensated, and compensation creates records. As I shifted on the bench, metal biting into bone, a thought settled in with uncomfortable clarity. People like Elena don't panic when systems are examined. They panic when the wrong person starts examining them. And for 10 years, I'd been learning exactly how to do that. The edge of the bench pressed into my lower back, and I shifted just enough to keep my hands from going numb. Metal has a way of forcing your attention inward. With nothing to do and nowhere to look, my mind went to the last person in my family, who never treated me like a rounding error. My grandfather, Thomas Miller. 3 months before the cuffs ever closed around my wrists, I stood in his living room while the house echoed with voices that weren't grieving so much as appraising. Cabinets opened, drawers slid out. My parents talked about square footage and market timing like they were touring a property, not clearing out a life. Elena walked from room to room with her phone in her hand, taking pictures. Not of him, of the house. This place could sell fast, she said, tapping the screen. Original structure, good bones. That phrase stuck with me. Good bones. Like he was already reduced to lumber and resale value. No one asked me how I was holding up. I was fine with that. Grief doesn't need an audience. Grandpa Thomas had been quiet toward the end. Not confused, just selective. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, he chose his words carefully, like he was still on a mission with limited bandwidth. He never bragged about his past, but everyone knew it. Former SEAL, multiple deployments. The kind of service record people mention in hushed tones, usually followed by the phrase classified or can't talk about it. When the lawyer arrived to read the will, Elena barely looked up from her phone. My parents sat forward alert. I stayed where I was, hands folded, already aware of how this would go. The house was to be sold. Proceeds split evenly between my parents. No surprise there. Then the lawyer cleared his throat and turned to me. To Sarah Miller, he said, "Thomas Miller leaves a personal item." Elena laughed out loud. "Oh, this should be good," she said, finally putting the phone down. The lawyer handed me a small tin box, dented, scratched, the kind of thing you'd find in the back of a garage and throw away without thinking. I opened it. Inside was a challenge coin, worn smooth around the edges, heavy for its size. The kind of coin people who've earned them don't show off because they don't need to. Elena leaned over to look and snorted. "That's it," she said. "A piece of scrap metal." My mother frowned. "Your grandfather always was sentimental," she said, as if that explained the poor return on investment. Elena smirked at me. Guess he knew who the real achievers were. I closed the tin and put it in my pocket without saying a word. I didn't need to defend it. People who understand value don't argue with people who only recognize price. Later that evening, after everyone left and the house finally went quiet, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where Grandpa used to drink his coffee black and read the paper cover to cover, even when his hands shook too much to hold it steady. I took the coin out again. At first glance, it was nothing special. No flashy emblem, no bold engraving, just a simple design and a surface worn down by years of use. Then I turned it slowly under the light. That's when I saw it. A tiny mark near the edge, almost invisible. Not decorative, not random, intentional. Anyone else would have missed it. Most people look at objects like this as symbols. I look at them as systems. And systems always leave traces. I ran my thumb over the mark. It wasn't damage. It was a micro-etch. Precise, deliberate. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you spent your life verifying serial numbers, tracking lot codes, and catching discrepancies that didn't want to be caught. Logistics teaches you to distrust what's obvious. I grabbed a magnifier from my bag and looked again. The etching wasn't a word. It was a pattern, a sequence. Not sentimental at all. I smiled just a little. Grandpa hadn't been giving me a memory. He'd been giving me a tool. Back in the holding room, I could almost hear his voice the way it used to sound when he'd watch me work through a problem. People underestimate quiet work, he used to say. That's how it stays effective. He was the only one in my family who ever asked me about my job, without glazing over halfway through the answer. He'd listen, ask sharp questions, occasionally nod like he'd just confirmed something he already suspected. He knew what I did mattered. He also knew what Elena was becoming. I'd never asked him directly how much he saw. He never volunteered it either. Men like him don't accuse without proof, and they don't warn unless they know the warning will land. The coin had landed. As I sat there, wrists aching, I realized something else that hadn't occurred to me at the time of the will. Grandpa had given this house to people who saw it as money. He'd given me the coin because he knew I'd look closer. The MPs eventually came in to move me to another room. As they unlocked the cuffs for a moment and resecured them, the coin shifted in my pocket, solid and familiar. I didn't mention it. I didn't need to. Because that tiny etching, the one Elena laughed at, was starting to look less like a joke and more like a lock. And I had spent my entire career learning how to find the right key. The coin felt heavier in my pocket the next morning, not because it weighed more, but because I'd stopped pretending it was sentimental. I walked into my office, shut the door, and did what I always did when something didn't sit right. I opened the spreadsheets. I had been assigned a routine review of supply shipments tied to Elena's unit. Nothing glamorous. Standard reconciliation. Incoming materials versus invoices. Approved vendors versus actual deliveries. The kind of task people assume is automatic until it isn't. At first glance, everything looked clean. Too clean. In logistics, perfection is suspicious. Real systems have friction, delays, minor mismatches that get resolved through boring emails and follow-up calls. What I was seeing had no friction at all. Every number rounded nicely. Every total landed exactly where it should. That's when I stopped looking at totals and started looking at patterns. One subcontractor appeared again and again. Different shipment categories. Different billing codes. Same structure, same timing, same neat margins. I pulled their vendor profile. Registered name was generic. Address traced back to a holding office that hosted dozens of shell companies. Ownership listed as confidential, which isn't illegal, just inconvenient. Convenient for someone. I cross-referenced payment schedules with delivery logs. The numbers didn't lie, but they also didn't tell the whole truth. Shipments arrived lighter than billed. Services billed faster than they could reasonably be completed. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms, just enough to bleed money quietly. Millions of dollars don't vanish overnight. They drip. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This wasn't incompetence. This was design. I checked the authorization chain. Elena's signature appeared everywhere, not forged, not copied, clean, confident, exactly where it needed to be. That part didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the subcontractor's secondary contact email. It wasn't a corporate domain, it was personal. Marcus, Elena's husband. I didn't react. I didn't swear or slam my desk. I simply stared at the screen and let the shape of the thing form completely before touching it. I pulled public records, business filings, cross-ownership disclosures buried under layers of legal insulation. The trail was faint, but it was there. Marcus wasn't listed as an owner. He was listed as a consultant. Advisory roles are wonderfully flexible. They don't require much explanation. The company was bleeding the system dry, and Elena was holding the tap. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was shocked, but because everything suddenly made sense. The promotions, the confidence, the laughter on the runway that hadn't even happened yet but somehow already existed in the future. She hadn't just been using my work to look good. She'd been using her position to steal. From the military, from the system my grandfather had given his life to protect. And she'd been doing it with the kind of calm that comes from believing no one is paying attention. I paid attention for a living. I didn't confront her. That would have been pointless. People who profit from complexity don't confess when cornered. They escalate. Instead, I started a file. Not a report, not an email, a file, encrypted, layered, structured the way Grandpa's notes had taught me to structure sensitive information. Nothing stored locally, nothing labeled emotionally, just facts, time-stamped, verified, duplicated, every invoice discrepancy, every suspicious transfer, every approval that lined up too neatly with a payout. I didn't rush. Speed is how you make mistakes, and mistakes are how people like Elena survive. I worked after hours, during weekends. I copied data the way I'd copied it 1,000 times before. Except this time, I wasn't fixing a problem. I was documenting a crime. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. Elena wasn't skimming, she was steering, adjusting procurement cycles to favor her pipeline, reassigning oversight roles to officers who owed her favors, moving pieces with the patience of someone who believed the board belonged to her. And maybe it did. For now. I thought about the coin again, the micro-etching, the quiet warning disguised as a keepsake. Grandpa hadn't given it to me because he missed me. He gave it to me because he knew where this road led. The next time Elena and I crossed paths in the hallway, she smiled like nothing had changed. Like I was still the dependable sister who cleaned up behind her. "You look tired," she said lightly. "Too much number crunching." I nodded. "Something like that." She laughed, the same laugh. The one that assumed she was untouchable. "Try not to burn out," she said. "Not everyone's built for pressure." I watched her walk away, heels clicking, confidence intact. That's when I understood something important. She thought I was weak because I never fought her. She never considered that I might be patient. Over the following weeks, I refined the file, cross-checked every source, verified every assumption twice. I built redundancy into the encryption. If one access point failed, another held. If one copy was destroyed, 3 more existed somewhere else. This wasn't paranoia. It was procedure. I didn't know yet how or when the information would surface. I just knew that when it did, it needed to be undeniable. Spreadsheets don't care about family. They don't care about rank. They don't care how good you look in uniform. They only care whether the numbers add up. And Elena's numbers didn't. As I saved the latest iteration of the file and closed my laptop, I felt something settle into place. Not relief, not anger, resolve. I slipped the coin between my fingers and stood up, already aware that whatever came next wouldn't be subtle. Once you see the truth clearly, you stop pretending you can unsee it. And once you start keeping records, the countdown has already begun. I noticed the shift before anyone said a word. Requests that used to come through quietly started arriving with urgency. Deadlines tightened. Access logs refreshed more often than necessary. Elena stopped forwarding work and started asking questions, small ones, casual ones. The kind that sound harmless unless you know why they're being asked. She knew. People like her don't confront problems head-on. They reposition them. One afternoon, I returned to my office and found the door already unlocked. That shouldn't have been possible. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the lights, letting my instincts finish their sentence. Something had been moved. My desk looked the same, too much the same. Files stacked neatly, monitor asleep, no obvious disturbance. I logged in and checked my access history. Clean. Then I checked the system audit trail. There it was, a login that wasn't mine. Authorized credentials, short session, enough time to place something and leave. I didn't search immediately. I closed the door, sat down, and breathed. Panic makes you sloppy, and sloppiness is how traps snap shut. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath folders I hadn't touched in weeks, was a sealed envelope marked restricted. My name was typed neatly on the label. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Classified documents don't appear by accident. They're logged, tracked, signed in and out. The only reason they end up where they shouldn't is because someone wants them to. And someone had chosen me. By the time I finished documenting the intrusion timestamps, system logs, camera blind spots, I already knew how this would play out. Elena wouldn't accuse me directly. She'd let the system do it for her. The system always believes the person who looks like it belongs. That night, my parents insisted on a family dinner. Urgent, my mother said. Important. I almost declined. Then I realized declining would look like guilt, so I went. They'd set the table like it was a holiday. Cloth napkins, candles, the kind of setup meant to make serious conversations feel civilized. Elena arrived late, calm as ever, phone face down beside her plate. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. No one mentioned work. No one asked how I was doing. Forks scraped plates while eyes avoided mine. Then my father cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he said, folding his hands together, "about what's best for everyone." My mother slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside was a document, official, clean, already signed by them. Voluntary discharge, psychological grounds. I read it once, then again. "This protects the family," my mother said quickly. "It's temporary. Quiet. You leave before things get complicated." I looked up at her. "You think I'm unstable?" She hesitated. We think you're under a lot of stress. Elena finally looked up. Sarah, she said gently like she was calming a child. This is the graceful option. I laughed once. Short, unplanned. You want me to erase myself, I said, so no one asks why. My father's face hardened. You've always made things difficult, he said. You question everything. You don't know when to stop. I pushed the folder back across the table. I'm not signing this. Silence dropped hard. My father stood so fast his chair tipped back. Why do we keep you around, he shouted. What purpose do you even serve? There it was, not anger, not fear, contempt. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't defend me or attack me. She reached for her phone, slowly, casually, thumb-tapping once. I recognized the look of someone notifying security before a fire alarm goes off. I stood up. I'm leaving, I said. No one stopped me. By the time I reached my car, my hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected shaking, tears, something dramatic. Instead, I felt focused. I drove back to base and worked late. I backed up my encrypted file again, checked redundancies, confirmed access routes. Everything was intact. If Elena wanted a war of procedure, I'd been trained for that. The knock came the next morning. 2 MPS, professional, polite. Captain Miller once said, "We need you to come with us." I nodded, grabbed my jacket, slipped the coin into my pocket without thinking. As they escorted me down the hallway, I noticed people watching. The looks weren't curious, they were resigned. The system had already decided who I was. When we reached my office, one of the MPs gestured inside. "Please step aside." They searched quickly, efficiently. Then one of them reached into the drawer and pulled out the envelope. His expression changed. "This is serious," he said. "I know," I replied. They didn't cuff me there, not yet. They escorted me to holding, asked routine questions, thanked me for my cooperation. Elena didn't show up. She didn't need to. She'd already moved the pieces. As I sat there waiting, I understood the elegance of what she'd done. She hadn't destroyed my evidence. She hadn't confronted me. She'd turned my reputation into a liability and let the institution finish the job. Trust is the most efficient weapon there is. People hand it to you willingly. Then they're shocked when you aim it. I leaned back and closed my eyes, the coin warm against my leg. She thought she'd won. She thought silence meant surrender. What she didn't understand was this. I never needed her to underestimate me. I only needed her to act exactly like herself. The sun was already up when they walked me onto the runway. Morning light has a way of making everything look honest. Clean lines, clear air. No place to hide mistakes. I noticed that before I noticed the cuffs again, cold and familiar, locking into place, like the system had rehearsed this moment. I didn't resist. That seemed to confuse them more than shouting ever would. One MP kept glancing at me, waiting for something, anger, denial, panic. I gave him none of it. I walked where they told me to walk. I stood where they told me to stand. Cooperation executed precisely. That's how you buy time. People expect the innocent to perform innocence. When you don't, they lean forward instead of tuning out. Curiosity is a lever, and I needed it engaged. As we moved across the tarmac, I felt eyes on me from every direction. Whispers stayed just low enough to pretend they weren't happening. Someone laughed nervously, someone else looked away. And then there was Elena, standing exactly where she wanted to be seen. Close enough to watch, far enough to stay clean. Her smile was relaxed, almost bored, like this was the last step of a checklist she'd completed weeks ago. She didn't wave, she didn't gloat openly, she didn't have to. I kept my face neutral, no tears, no pleas. I gave her nothing to feed on. Inside, though, everything was moving. Silence isn't emptiness, it's compression. As they guided me toward the vehicle, I felt the weight of the coin shift in my pocket. That small movement grounded me. I wasn't improvising, I was following a sequence. The door closed, the engine started, the runway slid away. In the back of the vehicle, I sat straight and quiet, counting turns, listening to radio chatter. I wasn't supposed to hear, but did anyway. Logistics habit. Always know where you are, even when you're not meant to. At the holding facility, they processed me quickly. Names, times, signatures, everything stamped and recorded. They took my phone, my watch, my belt. They missed one thing. When the guard stepped away, I asked politely if I could send a message. Just to let someone know where I am, I said. Calm, reasonable. He hesitated, then handed my phone back under supervision. I typed one line. Grandpa's roses are blooming. No emojis, no context. No explanation. I hit send. That was it. They took the phone again. The door closed. Silence settled like dust. That's the part most people get wrong about being detained. It's not loud. It's slow, time stretches, your mind looks for exits that aren't there. Unless you plan for that stretch. I leaned back and waited. Across the base, Elena was doing the opposite. Later I'd learned she was at the officers' club drink already in hand before noon. Promotion buzz travels fast, especially when it's fueled by someone else's removal. People congratulated her, asked how she was holding up, told her how unfortunate it was, what had happened to me. She played her part perfectly. Sad eyes, gentle sigh, the burden of being the responsible one. Inside she was celebrating something else. With me gone, my oversight role would be reassigned. With the investigation redirected, her subcontractor pipeline would clear. With my name attached to classified theft, anything I'd ever flagged would be dismissed as revenge or instability. She'd built a clean narrative. She always did. Back in holding hours passed without questions. That wasn't accidental. Let the suspects stew. Let doubt creep in. Let the system do the heavy lifting. I didn't stew. I watched the way guards shifted during changeover. I noted which doors opened first and which ones lagged. I listened to conversations that weren't meant for me but happened anyway. Systems leak. People leak more. Eventually someone came for me. Not an MP this time. Higher rank, different posture, the kind of person who doesn't introduce themselves until they've already sized you up. Captain Miller, he said, you've been very quiet. Yes, sir, you understand the severity of the charges. I understand the process. That earned a pause. Most people in your position try to explain themselves, he said. I met his eyes. Explanations come later. Evidence comes first. He studied me for a long second, then nodded slightly and left without another word. That was enough. Curiosity had been activated. The waiting resumed, but it felt different now. Like standing on a platform, knowing the train was already moving toward you even if you couldn't hear it yet. I thought about Elena again. About how she mistook my silence for defeat. People who weaponize trust always assume everyone else is unarmed. They never imagine someone might be playing a longer game. The message I sent wasn't sentimental, it wasn't poetic, it was operational. Grandpa's notes had taught me that some systems only respond to the right phrase at the right time. If you say too much, you trigger defenses. If you say too little, nothing moves. Roses blooming meant conditions met. I shifted on the bench and felt a flicker of something close to satisfaction. Not joy, not revenge. Alignment. Whatever happened next was out of my hands now. The file was secure. The signal was sent. The system my grandfather built was awake. All I had to do was keep doing what I'd always done best. Wait, stay quiet, and let the truth move through the channels it trusted most. The chair across from me scraped the floor slow and deliberate. General Vance didn't rush. Men who reach that rank rarely do. He studied me the way people study maps, looking for terrain, not excuses. His eyes were sharp, not angry. That was worse. Anger wants a reaction. Precision wants results. Captain Miller, he said. Sitting down, you've been accused of stealing classified budget documents. Yes, sir, you've refused to make a statement. Yes, sir, he leaned back slightly. That's unusual. So is accusing a logistics officer of a crime that leaves a paper trail, I said. He didn't smile, he didn't frown, he waited. Silence again. But this time it wasn't mine alone. I felt the coin against my thigh, solid, unimpressed by rank. Sir, I said finally, before we talk about me, I'd like you to look at something. Vance's eyebrow lifted a fraction. You're in no position to make requests. I know, I said. That's why this one matters. I reached into my pocket slowly, deliberately, hands visible. Procedure matters when everyone's armed. I placed the coin on the table between us. He glanced down at it, unimpressed. A challenge coin, he asked. You want to explain this, I want you to scan it. That got his attention. Why? Because my grandfather told me you'd know what to do with it. That did it. He picked up the coin and turned it once under the light. His posture shifted, not dramatically, just enough to register recognition. He didn't ask who my grandfather was. He already knew. Without another word, he stood and walked to the wall-mounted access terminal. It wasn't labeled for public use. Most people didn't even know it existed. He placed the coin against the reader. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the screen flashed. Red, not a warning, A status change. An alarm didn't blare. Systems like this don't announce themselves. They execute. Doors sealed, access points froze, vehicle gates dropped, communications rerouted. The base didn't panic. It locked. General Vance stared at the screen as lines of authorization scrolled faster than a human could read. Independent oversight channel, he muttered. I haven't seen this since my grandfather retired, I finished. He turned back to me, eyes no longer clinical. Captain, he said. Slowly. What did you just activate? A system designed to watch the watchers, I said. It records procurement flows, access anomalies, internal authorizations. It stays dormant unless triggered by a verified key. He looked at the coin again. And this is the key. Yes, sir. Another officer burst into the room. Breath short but controlled. General, he said. We're in full lockdown, no outbound movement authorized. Vance didn't look surprised. Who tried to leave, he asked. The officer hesitated. Major Elena Miller. She was intercepted at the south gate. She had a rolling case with classified labels. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Timing was everything. On the other side of the base, Elena was discovering what panic feels like when confidence runs out of road. The gates didn't respond. The guards didn't bend. Her rank didn't open anything, because this system didn't answer to rank. It answered to records. Back in the room, screens lit up one by one. Procurement timelines, vendor networks, financial flows branching outward like veins. Names appeared, dates, approvals, transfers, no commentary, no interpretation, just facts. This system, I said, was designed to avoid internal interference. It doesn't alert the people it monitors. It doesn't store data locally. It mirrors activity to an external oversight node. Vance's jaw tightened. FBI. Yes, sir. The room went quiet. Your grandfather, he said. Slowly built this without authorization. No, sir, I replied. He built it with permission. From people who understood that threats don't always wear enemy uniforms. Another officer entered this one, flanked by two men who didn't belong to the base. No insignia, no ceremony. FBI. They nodded once at Vance and turned their attention to the screens. One of them whistled softly. That's a clean dataset, he said. We don't usually get that. I do, I said. I've been living in it for months. Vance looked at me again, really looked this time. You knew this would happen, he said. I knew what she'd do when cornered, I replied. People don't change under pressure. They reveal priorities. Another alert flashed. Major Miller is being escorted to holding, an officer reported. She's not cooperating. I didn't react. I didn't need to. The showdown wasn't about yelling across a table. It was about watching a narrative collapse under its own weight. Vance picked up the coin and placed it back in my hand. Your grandfather, he said quietly, was ahead of his time. He always was, I said. The general straightened. The room followed. Captain Sarah Miller, he said. Voice carrying authority again. You are temporarily relieved from detention, pending full review. I stood. No victory speech, no relief, just alignment clicking into place. As they escorted me out, not in cuffs this time, I passed a monitor showing the south gate. Elena stood there, jaw tight, eyes darting. The rolling case sat abandoned at her feet. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not because she'd lost rank, because she'd lost control. I didn't stop to watch. Some reckonings don't need witnesses. All I knew was this. The base was sealed. The records were live. And the system my grandfather trusted me with was doing exactly what it was built to do. Protect the truth from the people most convinced they owned it. I stood at the back of the operations center while the screens did what words never could. No narration, no spin, just timelines, signatures, transfer paths, and authorization chains lighting up in sequence. Every click Elena had hidden behind confidence now sat exposed in high resolution. The room was full of senior leadership, but no one spoke. They didn't need to. Evidence doesn't ask for opinions. I watched faces change as the scope became unavoidable. This wasn't one bad decision or a gray area shortcut. It was systematic, sustained, personal. Fake signatures appeared next. Clean enough to fool casual reviews, sloppy enough to fall apart when compared side by side. Then the staged security alert. The access logs showing how my office had been entered using approved credentials at a time Elena claimed she'd been off base. The trap unfolded in reverse. Someone exhaled sharply behind me. No one looked at me. That was the difference. When people think you're guilty, they stare. When they realize they misjudged you, they avoid eye contact. On one screen, the camera feed switched to the main gate. Elena stood there, blocked by 2 MPs. Her posture was rigid, chin lifted like rank alone might still force reality to bend. The rolling case sat upright beside her, handle extended. She gestured sharply, clearly demanding something. Then the FBI agents stepped into frame. They didn't rush, they didn't raise voices, they didn't explain, they just stood there. Her face changed in real time. The smile she'd mastered for years drained out of her, replaced by something thin and unfamiliar. Fear stripped of performance. One of the agents spoke. I couldn't hear it, but I knew the tone. Calm, final. Elena said something back. Too fast, too loud. The MPs moved. The case was taken first, then her phone, then her hands. No one applauded, no one commented. The room stayed quiet because there was nothing left to debate. That's when my phone rang. They'd returned it to me earlier, quietly, without ceremony. The screen lit up with my mother's name. I didn't answer at first. I watched as the feed cut away from the gate and returned to the data. Numbers settling into their final shape. Months of quiet work now impossible to ignore. The phone rang again, then my father. I stepped out into the hallway and answered. Sarah, my mother said immediately. No greeting, no pause. We need to talk. I'm busy, I replied. This has gone too far, she said. Elena made mistakes, but this will destroy the family. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I'd heard this tone my entire life, the one that framed accountability as inconvenience. You need to stop this, my father said, his voice cutting in. Withdraw your statement. Tell them you were confused, stressed, that you overreacted. I opened my eyes. Are you asking me to lie? I asked. We're asking you to be reasonable, my mother said. Think about everything we've done for you. I almost laughed. Everything they'd done for me had come with conditions. Silence, compliance, gratitude for scraps. This isn't about you, my father said sharply. It's about protecting what we built. There it was again. Not who. What? I straightened. Family isn't a financial instrument, I said. And I'm not your ATM anymore. Silence. Then my mother spoke, her voice smaller now. You'd really let her go to prison. I pictured Elena at the gate. The moment rank stopped working. The moment she realized she'd mistaken authority for immunity. I'm not letting anything happen, I said. She made choices. This is what they cost. I ended the call. Back inside, General Vance stood near the screens, arms crossed. He looked tired, not from the situation, but from the weight of realizing how close this had come to staying hidden. You held your ground, he said quietly as I approached. I held the record, I replied. The ground moved on its own. He nodded once. I misjudged you, he said. So did most people, I answered, not unkindly. That's what growth looks like. Not triumph, not forgiveness, clarity. An agent approached with a tablet. We'll need a formal statement, he said, and continued cooperation. You'll have it, I replied. Everything's documented. I know, he said. That's why this worked. As he walked away, I caught my reflection in the dark screen of an inactive monitor. Same uniform, same insignia, different posture. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't compensating. I was standing where I belonged. Later, as the base began its slow return to normal operations, I passed the officers' club. The lights were still on, untouched drinks, abandoned on tables. Celebration interrupted by consequence. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt lighter, because rank had finally stopped being a costume. And for once, the truth didn't need anyone's permission to be seen. The sentence came down on a Tuesday. 15 years, no dramatic gasps, no courtroom theatrics, just a judge reading numbers that would reshape the rest of Elena's life. Treason, embezzlement, abuse of authority, each count landed clean backed by records that didn't flinch under scrutiny. Elena didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw-locked, posture rigid, like rank might still protect her if she held it long enough. But rank doesn't survive conviction. It evaporates the moment the verdict becomes permanent. I didn't feel victory, I felt closure. The kind that comes when a system finally finishes a job it should have started years earlier. My parents weren't in the courtroom. They'd stopped attending hearings once it became clear this wasn't going to be smoothed over. legal fees, frozen accounts, civil recovery tied to Elena's debts. It all stacked faster than they expected. Turns out living off reflected success leaves you unprepared for direct consequences. They moved out of the house before the bank finished the paperwork. Last I heard, they were renting a small apartment on the edge of town, no view, no space for trophies, just rooms that fit exactly what they could afford. They didn't call again, I didn't reach out. Some distances aren't created by anger, they're created by clarity. The military review board cleared my name in less than an hour. That's how it goes when evidence has already done the talking. The record corrected itself, quietly, efficiently. Then came the promotion, not ceremonial, not flashy, a closed-door notification and a signed order. Accelerated advancement based on service record integrity under pressure and contribution to operational security. I accepted it without a speech. Validation feels different when you've already stopped needing it. A week later, I stood in front of my grandfather's grave. No crowd, no family gathering. Just me, the wind, and a headstone that didn't list half of what he'd done. Men like him never get full summaries. I held the medal in my hand, the one I'd earned years ago but never received because my work had been credited elsewhere. The review board made sure that mistake was corrected too. It was heavier than it looked. Not because of medal, because of timing. I figured it out, I said quietly, not expecting an answer. You weren't testing me. You were trusting me. I placed the medal down for a moment next to the coin I still carried everywhere. One visible, one invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. He'd understood something early that took me years to accept. You don't protect systems by being loud inside them. You protect them by keeping records when no one's watching. I stood there longer than I planned, not mourning, not celebrating, just standing in the absence of tension I'd lived with for most of my life. When I finally turned away, I felt different. Not lighter, aligned. Back at work, my days changed. More responsibility, fewer explanations. People ask questions now and actually listen to the answers, not because of what happened, but because of what survived it. Trust rebuilt the right way is quieter than applause. Sometimes I wonder what Elena thinks about in her cell, whether she still believes she was unlucky instead of exposed, whether she replays the moment the gates closed and realizes that confidence without accountability is just denial with better posture. I don't dwell on it. My life isn't shaped by her choices anymore. It's shaped by mine. If there's one thing this taught me, it's this. They can take your reputation. They can bury your name under doubt and paperwork and whispered assumptions. But they can't take the truth you documented. And if you trust yourself long enough to keep recording it eventually, the system has no choice but to catch up. If you believe accountability always finds its way back to people who fake their power, hit subscribe. And if the person who betrayed you the most was someone you trusted with your name, what would you do next? Tell me in the comments. I didn't win because I spoke better than my sister. I won because I wrote things down when no one else bothered to. That's the part people keep missing when they hear my story. They assume there was a dramatic confrontation, some perfectly timed speech that changed everything. There wasn't. There was paperwork. There were logs. There were timestamps that didn't care who my parents loved more or whose name sounded better at a promotion ceremony. For most of my career, I was invisible on purpose. Logistics trains you that way. If everyone notices you, something is already wrong. When the fuel arrives on time, no one asks how. When the numbers balance, no one claps. You just move on to the next problem. That invisibility used to frustrate me. I thought it meant I wasn't respected. I thought it meant I was losing. What I didn't understand back then was that invisibility is only weakness if you stop paying attention. I never stopped. While other people were talking, I was tracking. While they were arguing, I was recording. While they were convincing themselves that intentions mattered, I was making sure outcomes were traceable. That habit didn't come from bitterness. It came from survival. When you grow up in a family where the rules shift depending on who's in the room, you learn quickly that memory is unreliable. Promises change. Stories get rewritten. What was said last year suddenly never happened. Unless you have proof. Most people don't lose because they're wrong. They lose because they can't prove they're right in a system that doesn't care about feelings. That's true at work. It's true in families. It's true in life. I see it all the time now. People come to me quietly and tell me their version of what's happening to them. A boss taking credit. a sibling draining shared resources, a parent rewriting history to justify favoritism. They're angry, hurt, exhausted, and almost all of them say the same thing at some point. I just want them to understand. That's where they're already behind. Systems don't run on understanding, they run on records. The military didn't believe me because I was calm or moral or sincere. It believed the documentation, the timestamps, the access logs, the financial trails that didn't line up no matter how you frame them. That's not cold, that's fair. And fairness, when it finally shows up, is almost always boring. No one teaches you this growing up. We're told to speak up, to be honest, to trust that the truth will come out if we're patient enough. That sounds good, but it's incomplete. The truth doesn't come out on its own. It has to be preserved long enough to survive contact with power. That's what documentation does. It keeps the truth alive when people would rather bury it. This doesn't mean you live paranoid or turn every interaction into a legal case. It means you stop relying on memory in environments that benefit from forgetting. If you're the only one consistently doing the unglamorous work, start keeping copies of your contributions. If your role depends on verbal agreements, follow them up in writing. If you notice patterns that make you uncomfortable, log them before you explain them. Not to threaten, not to manipulate, to protect yourself. Because here's the uncomfortable part. People who benefit from ambiguity will always accuse you of overreacting when you introduce clarity. They'll say you're being difficult, distrustful, negative. They'll tell you that keeping records means you don't believe in the relationship, the team, the family. What they really mean is that your memory makes their version harder to sell. When I started documenting my sister's work, I didn't think of it as building a case. I thought of it as doing my job thoroughly. The case built itself because the truth has structure. Lies require maintenance. Documentation is patient. It doesn't argue, it doesn't escalate, it just waits. That's the quiet advantage. You don't need to win every conversation if you're willing to win the record. You don't need to be believed today if you can be proven right later. And later always comes faster than people think. I also learned something else through all of this, something that surprised me. Keeping records didn't make me colder. It made me calmer. Once I stopped trying to convince people who were invested in misunderstanding me, I had more energy for people who actually listened. Once I trusted the process instead of the reaction, I stopped second-guessing myself. Clarity does that. It replaces anxiety with direction. I don't document to punish. I document to stay sane. If you've ever been the reliable one, the quiet one, the person everyone leans on, and then forgets. Here's what I want you to take from this. Stop assuming your value will be recognized without evidence. It won't. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It means you're operating in a world that rewards what can be traced, not what can be felt. Write things down, save the email, keep the version history, maintain your own timeline even if no one else sees it yet. Especially if no one else sees it yet. Because one day when the story changes and someone asks what really happened, you'll be the only one who doesn't have to guess. And in a system that runs on proof, that's not paranoia, that's power. For a long time, I thought something was wrong with me because being around my family felt like work. Not normal work. Not the kind that leaves you tired but satisfied. This was the kind of work that drained you before you even started. Conversations that required preparation. Visits that came with consequences. Silence that somehow counted as disobedience. I used to tell myself that was just how families were. I was wrong. What I grew up in wasn't just a family, it was a system. Every system has roles. Someone leads, someone benefits, someone absorbs the cost. In my family, Elena was the investment. I was the buffer. The system worked because I cooperated with it. I was the one who adjusted. The one who understood. The one who didn't make things uncomfortable. When something went wrong, I was expected to smooth it over. When something went right, I was expected to applaud. That wasn't love, it was resource management. Families like that don't collapse on their own. They run for years because they convince one person to keep paying emotional taxes on behalf of everyone else. Guilt, obligation, silence, those are the fees. I paid them without realizing it. Every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace, I paid. Every time I covered a gap, I paid. Every time I accepted less so someone else could feel like more, I paid. And like any bad system, the cost kept increasing. The hardest moment in all of this wasn't watching my sister get arrested. It was the phone call from my parents asking me to fix what she had broken. Not because they believed she was innocent, because they believed I was responsible. That's when it clicked. They didn't see me as a daughter who had been wronged. They saw me as a lever, a resource, something to pull when the system started shaking. That realization hurt more than anything else. We don't talk enough about how dangerous loyalty becomes when it's one-directional, how family gets used as a shield for behavior no one would tolerate from a stranger. If your boss treated you the way some families do, you'd quit. If a friend did it, you'd walk away. But when it's family, you're told endurance equals virtue. It doesn't. Endurance without boundaries just teaches people how much they can take from you. I didn't cut my family off in a dramatic moment. There was no announcement, no final argument. I just stopped paying. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped rescuing them from consequences. I stopped absorbing blame that wasn't mine. That wasn't cruelty. That was self-respect. A lot of people hear that and get uncomfortable. They imagine bitterness, revenge, coldness. That's not what it felt like. It felt quiet. For the first time, my decisions weren't being filtered through someone else's expectations. My silence wasn't being used as permission. My success wasn't being rerouted to someone else's image. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was opting out. Here's what I want you to understand if you're in a similar position. You are not required to keep funding a system that harms you just because you were born into it. Blood explains connection. It does not justify exploitation. If every interaction leaves you feeling smaller, confused, or guilty for having needs, that's not closeness. That's control wearing a familiar face. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop bleeding. And yes, people will react badly at first. Systems always resist change. They'll call you selfish. They'll accuse you of abandoning them. They'll rewrite the story so your absence becomes the problem instead of their behavior. Let them. You don't correct a system by arguing with it. You correct it by refusing to play your assigned role. I learned something important once I stopped engaging. The people who truly cared adjusted. The people who depended on my compliance disappeared. That told me everything I needed to know. If you're listening to this and feeling that tight recognition in your chest, here's my advice, and it's practical. Start small. Stop explaining. Document your limits and keep them consistent. You don't owe anyone unlimited access to you just because they share your last name. Family should be a place where your value isn't conditional on what you provide. If it isn't, you're allowed to step back without shame. Walking away doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you honest. And honesty, even when it costs you relationships, is still cheaper than spending your life paying emotional taxes to people who never intended to protect you. For a while after everything ended, people kept asking me the same question. How did you know it would work? They meant the evidence, the system, the patience. They were looking for a tactic they could copy, a sequence they could follow. I never had a satisfying answer for them. Because the truth is, I didn't know it would work. I knew something else. I knew I could live with myself either way. That's the part no one talks about when they discuss power. Power is loud. It demands proof in public. Integrity is quieter. It only answers to you when no one is watching. My sister had power, rank, influence, access. She moved through rooms like she owned them because for a long time she did. People listened when she spoke, doors opened, rules softened. I had none of that. What I had was consistency. I showed up the same way every day. I did the work even when no one praised it. I followed procedures even when shortcuts would have made my life easier. I kept records even when it felt unnecessary. At the time, that felt like losing. Looking back, it was insurance. Power operates on momentum. As long as it's moving forward, it feels unstoppable. That's why people chase it. It gives the illusion of permanence. Integrity doesn't feel permanent while you're practicing it. It feels slow, unrewarded, sometimes stupid, until the moment it's the only thing left standing. When the investigation ended and the noise died down, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Elena, not at my parents, not even at the system that failed me for so long. Anger requires proximity. I had moved past that. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness. It was distance. Distance gives you perspective. And perspective shows you that most people don't fall because they're evil. They fall because they confuse power with safety. Elena thought her rank made her untouchable. My parents thought proximity to her success would protect them. They built their lives around borrowed authority, I built mine around standards. Standards don't guarantee success. They guarantee something more important: continuity. When circumstances change, when alliances shift, when attention moves on, standards stay usable. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to be principled. I was trained into it by a job that punished sloppiness and rewarded accuracy, even if the reward came years later. That training saved me. It also changed how I see success. Success isn't about how fast you rise. It's about what you can still stand on when everything that lifted you disappears. I've seen people climb quickly by cutting corners, borrowing credit, or aligning themselves with the right names. It works for a while, until it doesn't. Integrity is boring on the way up. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't get applause at dinners, but it's incredibly effective when things fall apart. Here's something I wish someone had told me earlier. If you have to become someone you don't respect in order to win, you're not winning. You're trading the future for the present. That trade always comes due. When my career stalled while Elena's accelerated, I questioned myself more than once. I wondered if I was being naive, too rigid, too slow. I wasn't. I was building something that didn't depend on who liked me. That's what integrity really is. It's independence from approval. It doesn't mean you don't care what people think. It means your decisions aren't hostage to their reactions. You choose actions you can defend later, even if they cost you now. That choice compounds, quietly. Every time you choose accuracy over convenience, you strengthen it. Every time you tell the truth when lying would be easier, you reinforce it. Every time you walk away from something that would compromise you, you add weight to it. Eventually, that weight matters. Not in dramatic ways, in structural ones. When everything else was stripped away, rank, family backing. Public narrative integrity was the only thing that didn't need defending. It defended itself. That's why I don't regret the years it took. I don't regret being overlooked. I don't regret being underestimated. Those years taught me how to build a life that doesn't collapse when admiration turns into suspicion. If you're listening to this and feeling behind, here's what I want you to hear clearly. Being slow doesn't mean you're losing. Being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Being ethical doesn't mean you're naive. It means you're playing a longer game. A game where the goal isn't to dominate others, but to remain intact when circumstances change. Power fades when attention shifts. Integrity stays when everything else is stripped away. And if the world ever tries to tell you that doing the right thing was a mistake, remember this. The people who say that are usually trying to outrun their own records. You don't need to. You just need to keep yours clean.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction created by artificial intelligence to heighten drama and emotion. But the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.